Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Communities Live here on Sheffield Live 93.2 FM. Chris and Ellie here, and now we're going to talk about a certain documentary. It is called Elemental, Reimagine Wildfires. We have the director here, Trip Jennings. Good afternoon.
Thanks so much for having me. Nice to be here chatting with you.
It's nice for you to come. Thank you for coming, and I'm looking forward to this. So, to our listeners at home, give us a bit of background. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I've been making documentaries kind of since in like reality-based, video content, I guess, since I was like in high school. And now I'm many years out of there. Uh but this is I direct a show for PBS about climate, extreme weather, and how to prepare. And this film, Elemental Reimagine Wildfire, it's kind of like a deep dive into, I think, one of the most important issues that we talk about in our show, right? And I mean, it's an issue that's important in the United States. People think about it in California and Australia. But I mean, as the climate warms, temperatures get hotter, vegetation gets drier. It's all over the place. I mean, last July, dozens of homes were burned in London in wildfires, right? So this is an issue that's like it's just the destruction is increasing exponentially all over the world, and it's something that I just really wanted to dive into because I think that there's real ways we can change and make ourselves safer.
I wanted to actually ask you about that because it is a very serious issue and topic, and I think it's how would you, if you had any idea to change the climate crisis? I mean, what would your ideas be? I mean,
Oh
what?
yeah. Well, boy, I love that question. I would love to just be able to say what I think should happen and have it go. But like when it comes to wildfire, look, we have been operating under assumptions and experience that we created over the last 100 years in Europe, a few hundred years, right? Um, and those assumptions and that plan was sort of made for a climate that doesn't exist anymore, right? So what we need to do, and it turns out that so many of the things that we rely on to keep ourselves safe from this old assumption are actually taking us in the wrong direction today.
Yes,
So we define this problem of wildfires as a problem that is in the forest, and we think of them so often. We call them forest fires, right? But
yes,
these fires, just using the example of London, last year in 2022 in July, they are not in forests. We're talking about grasslands. We're talking about fires that started on people's fences that then carried and burned down a bunch of homes nearby, right? So I think part of the understanding that needs to shift is this is not a problem that is far off in the backcountry in the forest. This is a
sure,
problem that we focus on the values that we want to protect, right? Our homes and our communities. And when we do that, we stop scapegoating forests, and forests are one of our most important allies and assets in slowing the climate change, right? Protecting trees, protecting wildlands, and not sort of blaming them and cutting down trees in hopes that that will reduce fire risk, right? That is taking us in the wrong direction when we're removing that carbon from a forest.
yeah,
And unfortunately, so often, I think that's true. I mean, you asked what I would do um, with regard to climate change more broadly, right? And what I would do is I would say, what are the real problems, and what are the real solutions? Because so often it's like fire, but in all sorts of other aspects, right? We're
yeah,
running around trying to figure out how to pull carbon out of the atmosphere with some contraptions that maybe will work a little bit, but that take fossil fuels to run them, and so on
yeah,
and so forth, right? Shouldn't we just be looking at the problem, at the source of the problem, where the real problem is, right?
yes,
So, for example, we should drive, electric vehicles instead of gas-powered cars, rather than try and scrub carbon out of the air once it's already been released. I think
yes,
that's the theme that I see in our reaction to climate change and where we get it wrong, then there is so much potential to get it right because there are so many smart people doing good work. And that's what's in this film. Like we got to talk to the smartest people in the world and bring them to the screen and put their ideas in a, I think, a cohesive, narrative that really provides a path forward when it comes to wildfire, how we how we make ourselves safer while at the same time reducing the risk of more climate change.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a very interesting topic. I mean, and also could be very life changing if we don't do anything soon. Um, I mean, you said you spoke to a lot of very clever people. How long did it actually take the series to get made together? How was it a long process or was it quite quick?
It was not quick. We This is our sixth year. This is like my wife is like this is the my other relationship. um, so yeah, we were in production and post production for 5 years.
Wow.
From the first fire, there was a fire that burned outside of Portland, Oregon, where I live on the West Coast, and that was kind of the impetus. That was the beginning of this. It took a while to secure some funding and to actually get out on shoots, but we started conceptualizing, figuring out this story almost 6 years ago. And so, that I think is an unusual opportunity in the media landscape that we live in today, right? Like
Yes.
most stories are produced on deadline very quickly. And I do that. I'm part of that. I produced an episode for PBS about climate, how it's changing, and how to prepare every 3 weeks, right? That's a pretty quick turnaround for a deep investigative documentary. And I mean, what an amazing thing that we have gotten to spend 5 years with this topic, developing relationships, long-term relationships. It took literally years to get some of these interviewees and now stars of the film comfortable with us, build the trust that they needed to build to really open up, invite us to their project sites and that sort of thing. Two of the, I think, most important interviews literally took 2 years to develop that relationship and get them to really tell us their story. And so yeah, I mean, it took a long time, and I think it was very worth the effort in the end.
I've got to ask you this, Trip. I mean, as a film director, who are your main influences? Who influenced you to become a documentary film director?
Well, I'll say that like I have identified for myself like a bit of a weak point in my own like, film career. Like I wish that I did a better job of seeking mentors and that sort of thing.
Sure.
And so I don't know if aspiring filmmakers are listening to this, seek mentorship. I sort of go it on my own so much, just because I'm very enthusiastic and excited about it. But I mean, we're talking in the UK, like I've been quoting David Attenborough since I was, you know, a tween, and just looking up to him, and I've worked with a bunch of people who've worked with him, and had a few clips and some shows that he narrated. So that was all very, came full circle. But I'll be honest, like I hear his narration every time I'm writing something about wildlife
Mm.
or the environment. Like I'm like, what would Sir David say? And how can I sort of like add my own flavor to it and add to the conversation in a way that's a little bit different. So I reference David Attenborough in my mind on almost every line that I write. So
I
yeah.
mean, you mentioned David Attenborough. I mean, you also got a very famous celebrity doing this TV series. So, tell us, how did that come together?
Yeah. Well, so David Oyelowo, I mean, what a voice, right?
Yeah,
He played Martin Luther King in Selma, right? He's in he's in Peter Rabbit. Like I don't know, he's just his voice I think is pretty, it's everywhere now. And he the first moment that I heard him say the word wildfire, I was like, I've got to work with this person. It
Yeah,
sent shivers up my spine. I just felt like his voice carried so much weight. Um, so the style was perfect. But it turns out that he lives in a neighborhood of Los Angeles that backs up to wildlands. And Los Angeles, I mean, if you watch our film, you'll see, but it's a crucible for wildfire, right?
sure.
It's they get just enough rain to grow vegetation in the winter, and it dries out very quickly in the summer, and they have winds that drive fires. And so he every year from his house sees plumes of smoke in the wildlands. It's kind of shrubby, some trees, some grassland around where he is. And he told me that he just thought every year, like one day those plumes of smoke are going to be close to my house and maybe threatening my house, and maybe I'll be one of those people evacuating. And so we came to him and we said, "Here's how you protect your home and your community." And he actually was having work done on his house, some renovations. And right after he saw the film, he said, "I'm going to go talk to my contractors and see if we can incorporate some of this stuff to keep my house safe right away." And so he, it worked, right? He was excited about what we were doing enough to implement it in his own life, and we were, just so grateful that he was willing to do it. So turned out to be a great relationship, and I think he adds a lot to the film. When I first watched the film after we got the narration in there, I was just like, "Oh, this is a real film. We're making a real, okay, this is good."
And I've got to say, I mean, we've come out of COVID. I mean, COVID was bad times for everybody. I mean, did that kind of affect filming in the London process for you?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we thought we were going to come out with this film in 2020.
Yeah,
Um, and that seemed like a bad year to come out with a film, if I'm being honest. so so we kind of waited a little bit and we were like, what do we do? And then there was this fire event that basically stretched from Canada to Mexico on the west coast of North America and affected thousands of people. I mean, the percentage of the population of Oregon and Washington that had to evacuate was so huge. Um, and so we thought, oh, okay, the science is evolving, and I think every major fire event like that, people's understanding evolves a bit. And so we ended up adding to the film. We ended up evolving the film a little bit through that process. Um, and so yeah, I mean, I think that had we not paused for COVID, um, we may have come out with the film. And honestly, I think it would have been a bit premature. I
yeah,
think that I think that the we had this idea that even in 2020, even just 3 years ago, I think that some of the ideas in the film uh, were almost too vanguard, like too early edge of the public's understanding.
oh, yeah,
And I think there's just enough creeping into the conversation around wildfire that this film really helps answer people's questions in a way that makes sense and they understand, you know? So I think we got kind of lucky in a way uh, that we postponed. Not that we had COVID, but
yeah.
yeah.
I've got to ask this trip. I mean, do you think there is still time to do to reverse the climate change? Do you think it's still possible, or do you think it's more of more? There's more chance of actually slowing it down?
Yeah. Um, here's I have a very specific opinion on that.
Right.
And this comes from interviewing, I believe the smartest people in the world on this topic every week, not only for this film, but also for the PBS show that I
Yeah, sure.
produce. And at this point, the most likely scenario is that the climate rises 2.6 degrees
Yeah.
by 2021. Um, that will trigger a dozen or so, maybe half a dozen tipping points that will fundamentally and rapidly change our experience of living on Earth.
Yeah.
And at the same time, humans are adapting faster than destruction is increasing. So the message is extremely dire, right? We have to change quickly. And at the same time, do not give up hope. We are adapting in a way that is, I think, quick enough. And we actually, even though there's 4 times more natural disasters worldwide, 50% less people die now of weather-related disasters than they did 50 years ago,
Yes.
right? So it is both dire and very crucial that we make the right changes immediately, and it is not doomsday. Don't give up and think that there is no way that we're going to change this and right the ship.
Yeah.
Because we are. The technology is very, very available. When I first started thinking about climate change and becoming worried about climate change, we fundamentally didn't have the technology to get to a carbon neutral society. And
Yes.
now we do. We do have that technology. We just need to implement it. And it's better to be fighting for implementation than it is to be fighting for something that doesn't exist yet.
Yes.
So I am actually very hopeful. And here's the goal. Here's what we have to do. We have to get to carbon neutral by 2050.
Yes.
Period. We have to do that. And we will overshoot some of the most important temperature limits. We'll get past 1.5. We'll probably get past 2.0 degrees Celsius of warming since pre-industrial levels, right?
Yeah.
But if we get to carbon neutral by 2050, we can come back. And our descendants will thank us for the work that we're doing now. And part of that is developing homes and communities that are resistant to wildfire. Because if we have these homes and communities that are not developed for the climate that we live in, and they all burn up,
Yeah.
and they put all this toxic smoke into the atmosphere and all this carbon out into the atmosphere, and then we have to rebuild them, and then they burn up again, it contributes to this vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle, yeah.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's and I've got to say I 100% agree with you. I mean, we have to change, and quickly, because to save this planet, and I mean it's very interesting because I think a lot of people still don't really understand how dangerous climate change can really be.
I think people don't understand how dangerous it can be, and I also think that people um, throw up a bit of a wall
Yeah.
to that understanding because it feels so big and so daunting and so scary.
Yes.
And I have a lot of sympathy for that, right? And
Sure.
I
Sure.
think what I just said, I feel like is a very important message that's not getting out enough. Because
Yes.
I think a lot of people, like, if people felt excited about it, if people felt like actually great things are happening, really exciting, cool things that we can reshape the way we use energy, in our society, and make ourselves and our descendants safer.
Yeah.
I find that really exciting, and it's not, it motivates me. So yeah, I forgive me for sort of harping on this, but I just feel like I can't say it enough.
Yeah. No. No. And we definitely need some positive news about this as well. I mean, yeah, it's like you say, it is a very frightening idea that the world is actually warming up,
Oh
and
yeah.
yeah,
And tipping points, man. Tipping points are
uh,
scary,
yeah,
right? This idea that, like, I mean, I think one of these fascinating tipping points is Atlantic overturning currents, right? As ice melts in Greenland, it dumps fresh water into the Atlantic and it slows this current down. And actually, what happens when that current slows down or stops is that the UK gets 7 degrees colder. Y'all
yes,
will be in like an ice age. It'll be very weird. And that's, I think, hard to understand. So anyway, yeah, I mean, and that's very, very hard to reverse, right?
Yes.
So that to me is why the speed that you, just as you said, right? We've got to change quickly. We've got 27 years to get to carbon neutral, and
Yeah.
we have to do it, and we will do it, and we have to.
I mean, I don't want to be too controversial about this, but I think
No,
like
get controversial.
I mean, it's like with the governments. Do you think the governments are actually listening to, like, try and get to net neutral by 2050? I mean, because it's. I mean, because there is. I mean, we do get protests now again, like just stop oil, and they're trying to like. We think that it's going to change things overnight, unfortunately, and
Mm.
unfortunately, it doesn't happen. It's not going to happen just like that, unfortunately. But it's like, do you think governments are listening to?
I think there's always going to be elements in governments that aren't, and there's always going to be elements in governments that are, right?
Yes,
And I think that it is going to be a constant push and pull between governments leading and governments following.
sure.
And sometimes governments are going to lead and sometimes governments are going to detract from this, right? But like think about what's happened so far. Just people, activists, in sort of all stripes of activism have pushed hard enough
Yeah.
to get subsidies for new technologies. We've now developed enough new technologies that renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels,
Yes.
right? So now private sector takes over and pushes for a while. And we're at that tipping point, right?
Sure.
Where, I mean, say what you will about Elon Musk. I have plenty of criticisms,
Yeah.
but the richest man in the world is that rich because of an electric vehicle company. Things have changed fundamentally,
Sure.
right? The business calculations have changed, right? We're going to see massive electric vehicle adoption over the next handful of years. And California just doubled the battery capacity in 2022. In 1 year, they doubled their battery capacity from everything that they'd put on the grid before that, right? That is an exponential rate of adoption. And that's because it's cheaper and it works and it's more durable, right? When they can store energy like that from renewables and from other energy, they don't have the same blackouts that they used to have.
Yeah.
So we're going to see avalanches of adoption of this kind of stuff. All of the new, sort of the low-hanging fruit is all going to be picked. And it's my hope that by the time we get through the, at this point, easier stuff, that governments and industry to some degree and activists, in 15 years,
Yeah.
start pushing really hard to get us over the finish line with all the difficult stuff, right?
Sure.
So are governments listening? I don't care. We have to push from the outside on governments to get the subsidies, and we have to push, I think, also from industry. I'd love this, I'd love it to be sort of a more organic, decentralized hippie deal. But we have to work with industry as well. We have to work
Sure.
with big industry to get the solar panels, the wind, all of that. So yeah, I don't get me wrong. We have a lot of pushing to do.
Yes.
We have a lot of work to do. It's not going to just happen on its own. But there's so much opportunity right now that I just think, yeah, governments can drag their feet all they want to, and we will drag them forward.
And thank you for sharing that with me, Trip. I mean, I've got to ask you, for anybody who wants to do like directing or like any kind of film or anything like that, be it documentary, be it a big budget film or something like that, what advice would you give to everybody?
Yeah. Well, I can comment on my path and sort of what I've seen, right? So I worked for National Geographic for a long time. I worked for PBS. I also do this independent film thing. So that's my background in the film industry. I also shot reality television for years before and sort of during all that. And so, my biggest piece of advice is like, figure out a thing that you like to do in the film industry that you're really interested in and you're really excited about, and do it real hard and become the best there is out there at that thing.
Yeah.
Um, for me, it was a little weird. It was a strange path, right? But I was really into whitewater kayaking. I was good at whitewater kayaking, and I traveled all over the world. And I filmed rivers being paddled in kayaks that had never been explored before, right? This exploratory kayaking, right? So I was doing this adventure. I could get into those places. I could film at a high level, and I wanted to tell some of the story of the places, right? The challenges, the environment, um, and that combination of whitewater skills, film skills, and just a keen interest in what was going on in those ecosystems. That is what got me in the door at National Geographic.
Right.
And they said, "Oh, that's a weird, great combination of things. We can work with this. Let's do this." And if it wasn't for that, I don't know what my career would. I would be on a very different path. So my point is just find the thing that you can be better than anybody else at, and do it really hard, and do it long enough that someone notices. And that's how you get your opportunity and your foot in the door.
I've got a final couple of questions for you because we are quickly running out of time, unfortunately. My final question for you is: how can people get to see this documentary film, Elemental? Will we get to see it in cinemas, or is it going to be like a TV release?
Yeah, so we are releasing it streaming globally on June 13th. So it's coming right up. If you go to elementalfilm.com, you can click on the streaming link and it'll get you to multiple streamers. But it's right now already available for pre-order on Apple. It's going to be on Amazon, and others. So it should be available to people all over the place. We did a theatrical tour in the US, and we're going to do a few theaters in the UK coming up here. But and yeah, and that was really fun. So fun to like connect with audiences and actually be in person after the pandemic. But finally now it's open to a way wider audience. So go to elementalfilm.com. It's called Elemental Reimagining Wildfire. Don't confuse it with the Pixar film that's about to come out called Elemental. and and yeah, let us know what you think. Like, go watch it and go to our site elementalfilm.com and send us your feedback too, because we love hearing that and we respond to all of those emails.
And my last question for you, Trip, is: have you got anything to say to our audience that you would like to say now?
Absolutely. I mean, thanks so much for listening and your excitement, about this issue. And I think we just need to remember that this is this global problem that is, specifically when it comes to fire, it's a global problem that we can absolutely adapt to. I think that the way we talk about fire in 5 years is really going to closely resemble this film. So watch it, show it to your neighbors, especially if you live in a fire-prone landscape, which turns out that it's almost everywhere.
Trip, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. Great conversation, and have a great day.